Firstly, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. This is the first time that we've put this together in this format, based similarly on our budget breakfast series, which most of you would know, many of you would have attended, where last year we had 400 at that. We expect about the same this year. And we knew that there was a lot of interest with the business community and the broader community as to budget time, but equally the half-yearly report is a critical time because we now know that there's only a few months left to the end of the financial year. So when Mark and I would discuss, Mark Bowles, our Chief Economist, were discussing what format today, we identified that Craig James, the Chief Economist for CommSec, would be an ideal person to lead into the budget half-yearly report. And we sincerely thank Commonwealth Bank for being able to sponsor Craig down for us here this morning, and we'll soon get into his presentation and address. It now gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce James Kambovski. James is the Commonwealth Bank's National Executive Manager, and I ask him to just say a few words of introduction to introduce Craig James for us.
Thank you for that, Robert. Well, good morning, everyone, or yes, it is still morning. Look, on behalf of the Commonwealth Bank, it's my honour and pleasure to be here today to introduce Craig. Before I do, I just did want to say a couple of things. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of my colleagues in the audience today. Stephen Mulcahy, who's the Senior Vice President of our Institutional Bank and Markets down here in Tasmania, who's with us. Steve, if you put your hand up so everyone can see you if they don't know you already. And Mark Howard, who's the Senior Manager in our Corporate and Business Banking area, is also with us here today, I understand. And, there he is over there hiding. Thank you, Mark. If you don't know either of these gentlemen, and if you don't bank with the Commonwealth Bank, can I ask you to make yourself known to them? And I'm sure they've got a deal that they can do for you that's better than any other deal that you've seen in the last 6 months. So can I encourage you to have a conversation with them? I think they call it, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Anyway, moving right along, as I said, we're very privileged to be here today. The Commonwealth Bank is always keen to engage with organisations that are about dialogue, that are about thought leadership, and the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry is definitely an organisation that fits that bill. I have had the honour and privilege in the past of attending the budget breakfasts that they run, which are very well attended, and it's a testimony that they are so successful. Thought leadership is important, and it's important that ideas are brought forward and discussed if this great state of Tasmania is to continue to prosper. Now let me introduce to you Craig James. Craig's current role is as the Chief Economist of CommSec, or Commonwealth Securities, and he's very much about interpreting the big picture in an economic sense, looking at financial trends and translating that for our clients and our staff. Prior to being the current role that he holds, he was Chief Economist at Colonial, and prior to that he actually worked for the Financial Review as a senior writer. As I said, he goes around presenting to staff and to our customers around trends, but he also appears quite often, as you may have seen him on the nightly news, in the financial media as well as in the press. He's worked in banking and finance and in journalism for over 30 years. He holds a bachelor and master's degree in commerce economics, both from the University of New South Wales, and in February this year he was appointed the adjunct professor at Curtin University Business School in Perth. Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to please give Craig James a very warm welcome.
Well, good afternoon. Certainly good to be here. It's good to see the cloudy skies and a bit of rain outside. It just makes me feel like I'm home in Sydney. We haven't had a summer. Yesterday, so I was in Melbourne, and it was over 30 degrees, and I didn't know what to do with myself because we had basically, I think, 2 days over summer over 30 degrees. So certainly like to see the cloudy skies. Yes, I have worked at the Financial Review before, and I found it interesting actually walking down from Treasury's offices this morning because I went past the Mercury. I noticed the sign outside saying they're going to move down to Salamanca Square in mid-2012. I would have thought that was a dangerous proposition, putting journalists down there where the eating and drinking venues are. But nevertheless, it's all about embracing opportunities, isn't it? Opportunities in this current time. And certainly in terms of my presentation today, if it ends up coming up, there it is all about embracing opportunities. You may think in the current environment there's just a multitude of bad news out there, and there certainly is a bit of bad news around the place. But I make no apologies for the fact that when I do a presentation, I do highlight the positives as well as the negatives. I think it's really important, particularly in the current environment, that we look at the opportunities that are posed by the current environment rather than focusing so much on the risks. Because if you focus on the opportunities, your business, your personal life may go forward rather than sort of staying stable or going backwards. Now you may be a little bit surprised at seeing C3PO and R2D2 up there in terms of an economic presentation. So what are we in for today? Well, you're not in for a great deal of econometrics. So if it was a lot of rocket science today, they wouldn't ask me to do the presentation today. So it's pretty clear from the beginning you're not going to get that. But Christmas time, my 14-year-old son actually wanted to get into the Star Wars films. He wanted that for Christmas. So we sat down and watched them. And one of the things that struck myself and my wife was basically C3PO running around all the place saying, we're all ruined, we're all going to die, nothing good is going to come out of this. And it really likened me to the current situation around the world where everyone's looking at the situation in Greece and Portugal and Spain and saying, we're all doomed, nothing good is going to come out of this. Now clearly in the Star Wars film, good always does come out of it. It's a film, there's always a happy ending. And in the current environment, we still believe that we are going to get out of this one unscathed. We've had crises in the past. We basically managed to address them, and we do come out the other side. Now it's talked about, entitled, May the Force Be With You. As you know from the Star Wars film, there is the dark side of the Force, and there is the light side of the Force. And unfortunately in the current environment, we tend to gravitate over to the dark side. Clearly, sort of in the journalistic fraternity, that's what generally happens, because we do know that people embrace bad news on page 1 much more than good news. That's just human psychology. But I do ask you today to focus on on the opportunities as to the negatives. Now, this is the most important slide today. This is the disclaimer slide. It basically says, look, I haven't run around the room, I don't know your own personal circumstances, so it's very much of a general nature today. Take a good 2 or 3 seconds to take all that information in. That's probably about enough. Europe, I have to talk right at the beginning in terms of talking about our big picture view of the world about Europe. And it's pretty clear even from last night's development, that Europe is all about a confidence thing. The European leaders at the moment aren't too sure whether they're going to give Greece the money now, the bailout funds, because they're unsure whether the parliamentarians, when they're elected in March, are going to turn around and say, well, that deal that we had, it's all bets are off. They don't trust the Greeks. They don't trust the Greek politicians to basically sign off on this deal and carry through on their obligations. And you think about the markets over the last couple of months, it's all about confidence about the countries to be able to make the right moves. Now, clearly places like Italy and Portugal and Spain borrowed too much to begin with, now they've got to pay it back. But now it's a question of investors whether they believe that the countries will pay it back. Now, Italy was in pretty good shape, but Greece and Portugal and Spain all put their hand out for bailouts, and everyone said the next one is going to be Italy. And of course the Italian government dithered and dathered, and as a result people didn't have the belief that Italy was going to be able to work its way out. Now, certainly there were some changes in Italy, as there was in Greece. They appointed an economist as a Prime Minister, as they did in Greece. So things are going to work out all right in Italy and Greece. But it is the case now they're actually making the right moves. And confidence has come back. So the bond rate in Italy went up to the order of 7%, now it's come back. And this week, Italy issued debt, and it was embraced by the markets. People have got greater confidence now that the countries are going to do what they say and turn the situation around. There's still challenges. I liken this year to the year of hurdles. Now, it's an Olympic year, so it works pretty well. And we have got the world champion female hurdler, sprint hurdler as well here in Australia. So again, that's quite appropriate. We're going to come up to hurdles over the year. Whether it's the case of a Greek vote, whether it's Italian bond auction, we're going to say, okay, we're going to clear this one. We clear it and then we race to the next hurdle. And I think that's going to be a bit like that, particularly in the first half of the year. So this is going to be with us for some time. But we believe the Europeans have got the message now that you've got to work this one out. You've got to come out the other side. Fundamentally, there's a lot of countries in very, very good shape. And you think, well, hold on. German unemployment is the lowest since reunification. They've got an unemployment level below 7%. And you say, why wasn't I told about this? I told you, this is good news. This is on page 23, back near the comics. If it was bad news, it'd be on page 1. This is good news, but this is fundamentally what's happening. A lot of the countries in Europe are in very, very good shape. Places like Germany, the heavyweight in terms of Europe, we believe that if it continues to have success in its economy, it'll drag the rest of the economies higher as well. Of course, it's not all bad news in the global situation. You go to the United States and there's continued good news. We've seen weekly jobless claims for unemployment insurance continuing to improve. It may surprise you to know that there's a lot of states in the US that are running budget surpluses. Oh, hold on, I wasn't told about that. Right the way across the middle of the United States, a whole range of states running budget surpluses. Overnight we had good figures on industrial production, super strong in December, maintaining the degree of strength in January. Certainly we're also seeing good news out of Asia. It is quite remarkable. You've got a lot of the luxury retailers around the world that are doing very, very well. Now the retailers here in Australia say, well, what have they got that we haven't got? Well, they've got Asian customers, basically. The Asian customers are really embracing the luxury brands at the moment because Asian economies are doing well, people are getting richer, and they're embracing those sorts of things. That's an opportunity in the current environment, certainly not a risk. Certainly an opportunity for Tasmanian tourism because we've got higher and higher income levels in Asia. We've got Chinese tourists wanting to use their newfound wealth and come to places like Australia, very much places like Tasmania. They've never seen blue skies like this beforehand. They've tended to see smog and cloud, and that's about it. Certainly Tasmania has a lot to offer the Asian tourists, and certainly they have got the dollars and the money to be able to spend. This should really bring it home that it's not all about Europe. It's not all about Greece and Portugal and Spain. You know, in terms of the global economy, this red line, newly industrialised Asia and developing Asia, it could be represented by two words, China and India. China and India together are bigger than the European Union. They are bigger than the United States. So it's all important, and China is growing, India is growing. The world economy this year is expected to grow by 3.3%. A lot of people say, well, that's nice. What's 3.3%? That's precisely the normal growth rate that we're seeing over the last 40 years. So 3.3% is actually a reasonable outcome. It's a slowdown from last year, but it's likely to pick up next year. What's driving the growth rate? Well, it's China. Right at the top, you can see that 0.7, basically almost a quarter out of that 3.3 is coming from China. And you've got the United States and you've got India up there. Now, can you see Greece up there? Or Portugal or Spain? Or even Germany or France? You can't. They're not contributing to global economic growth this year. But our global economy is still expected to grow. So when we're trying to rationalise what's happening overseas, it's not all about these European countries. They will work their way out of it. They know that there's no alternative but to work their way out. But the rest of the world is looking okay. Now here in Australia, we're doing okay. And certainly, you know, there's beautiful Cradle Mountain, which is represented on there. I think if economic presentations particularly ones, you know, sort of in Tasmania, had plenty of Tassie-type slides up there. It'd cheer the room, you know, sort of quite enormously, wouldn't it? Now, I couldn't get them on every slide, but I've got them, you know, sort of at least on one slide. We haven't had a recession here in Australia for 20 years. We need to be reminded of that fact. We get a bit gloomy sometimes. We haven't had a recession, apparently, since the recession we had to have back in 1991. So that was a long time between drinks. A lot of things have happened over that period of time. Why are we in such good shape? Well, I do like to say that if you're asked any question on the economy, just answer China, and you can't go too far wrong. So why is our dollar so high? You just look at them and you say, it's China. They're going to say, you're a guru, you know. That's just coal, iron ore prices going through the roof. I can understand that. Why are our interest rates so high? You just look at them again and you say, China. Oh yes, I can see where you're coming from. The Reserve Bank's concerned about inflation, concerned about all the money coming through here. Now it doesn't work with everything. Sometimes you've got to answer questions, Greece or Portugal or Spain. But it answers a whole lot of questions which are out there. China is a driving force behind our economy. It's driving the Asia region. And we're going to continue to see the influx of that in, you know, sort of coming years. We've got to remember the fact that we've got 1.3 billion people in China, 1.1 billion people in India. The world has never seen before industrialisation on this scale. A mass of people which are seeing their income levels rise, wanting to buy washing machines and cars and fridges. And how do they do that? They've got to have the resources. They've got to have the aluminium. They've got to have the copper. They've got to have the iron ore to be able to do so. Where are they going to get it from? They're going to get it from Australia. So we're at a wonderful point in human history to be able to benefit out of this situation. Here in Australia, though, we tend to be a little bit gloomy, and certainly there is very much a multi-speed economy that we have across Australia. We do a report called State of the States, which looks at the state and territory economies. And it's pretty clear that Western Australia is out in front. Most people would have expected that. Second spot is basically the ACT and Victoria. A lot of people say, well, the ACT is not an economy in the first place. Now, I'm not that harsh. I have to do presentations sometimes in Canberra, but what ACT and Victoria have got is they've got the housing industry. They've got people coming to the state. You know, it's fundamental, you know. If more people are coming to the state, if population growth is increasing, you've got to find somewhere for them to live. So you've got to build homes and a lot. Tasmanian government could be reminded of this fact that if you have population growth increasing, then you have a momentum in terms of the Tasmanian economy. That's what they have in Victoria. That's what they have in the ACT. That's what we could have in New South Wales. The new government's taking a little bit of time to settle themselves in before they get onto it. I don't know how many years it's going to take them. They've got a 4-year term, but they think as though they're safe for the second term as well. And certainly each state and territory has got to have something which is positive, driving, you know, the economy. And certainly here in Tasmania, the unemployment rate remains historically low, and that's very, very positive. But we're not spending down here, and that's the key source of frustration, certainly from the government. Where does the government get its money? Consumers out there spending, so they can get the GST revenue. And people, you know, sort of buying and selling houses. If you can do that, then the revenue comes through the coffers. And that's fundamentally the problem in terms of the government revenues at the moment, the government budget situation. Right the way across Australia, we're dealing with the same situation. Why? Retail spending last year was the slowest growth that was seen in 50 years. I am 50 this year, you know, so I think it must be something my fault somehow. You've got to go back 50 years to see the slowest growth rate that we've seen. And why is that? Well, inflation's down a bit, but it's also the fact that we're not spending. Of course, one of the reasons is the super strong Aussie dollar. So we're all travelling overseas. We're going to Europe, the United States. We're going over there with empty suitcases, and we're coming back with full suitcases, buying the goodies that we have abroad. And of course, more and more of us have been getting on the internet and buying our goods that way. And if you don't have any loyalty to your retailer here in Australia, don't have any loyalty to your department store or your camera retailer or whatnot, you're going to have no compulsion about going on the internet and buying your goods from overseas. That's what retailers are going to be doing more and more here in Australia, focusing on service quality, focusing on, you know, sort of backup after-sales service and trying to get that Apple effect working in terms of their business. It's an interesting environment. People aren't spending, and in terms of where they think the wisest place to put their money is in the bank. Now, Commonwealth Bank is not overly disappointed about that fact. 5.4% for a 3-month term deposit. Have I mentioned that? No, I didn't. You'll see a few commercials through there, but it's quite attractive, isn't it? But I'm from CommSec, and I'm a little bit disappointed because nobody wants to put their money in the share market at the moment. From Commonwealth Bank, though, we'll get your money one way or another. Whether you put your money in the share market or you put your money in term deposit, we'll provide a good return for you, though. In terms of the job figures, well, I'd like to have provided the latest job figures for you because they were out at 11:30. My offsider in Sydney was supposed to have SMS'd me. He didn't, so therefore he's sacked. But in Tasmania, the unemployment rate has been below longer-term averages, and that's very much an encouraging development. But if you go across Australia, you'll find disparities. In parts of Sydney, you like Canterbury, Bankstown and Fairfield, Liverpool, only a bit further out west, you've got unemployment rates up around about 7 or 8%. But if you go through to inner Sydney or to the eastern suburbs and the like, you'll see things like 3%. Why the disparity? What's happening in Australia? A lot of Australian job seekers are just happy where they are. Now, if the jobs are 40 minutes drive away, they say, well, that's a bit too far for me to go. I'm quite happy in staying where I am. I don't want to be travelling. So, unfortunately, governments will have to use carrot and stick approaches to be able to get the people where the jobs are, where high unemployment areas moving to those lower unemployment areas. This is a representation of what's happening with retail spending. Now, it'd be interesting if they were all in the one quadrant, but they're not. They're spread all around the place. Retailers are not cutting prices to increase volume, so that's not really happening. Some retailers are doing okay. Liquor retailing's doing okay. Apparently we're all drowning our sorrows. That may be the case, but they're doing okay. Department stores aren't. What they're seeing is a reduction in terms of volume, a reduction in terms of price. Bottom line, they're going to have to focus much more on service quality. They're going to have to focus much more on presenting brand loyalty and in getting people in. And retailers, certainly, you're at an amazing time in history here in Australia. High Aussie dollar, people buying goods overseas, you're going to have to change the degree of strategy. One reason we're not spending is this table here. These are the most important purchases that we make each and every week. Mortgage repayment and rent right the way up there. So if mortgage has gone up, perhaps they've only gone up 6 basis points or 10 basis points, it's still the most important payment that a lot of people are making. So if it's going up, if your electricity bill is going up, if your petrol bill is going up, these are the things you notice. So at home, you're getting your electricity bill coming through, or your gas or your water rates coming through, you're noticing it. You're going up to the petrol station, you missed the cheap day by 1 day, so you're paying $1.55 or $1.60 a litre. Clearly, we don't get our Excel spreadsheets to work out whether we can pay these things or not. No, what we say is, ooh, things have gone up, I'm going to have to cut back. So if these high-profile areas are going up, clearly that's a negative. State treasuries around Australia at the moment must be looking somewhat, shooting daggers at the federal government at the moment, because one thing which may be going up for a lot of people is private health insurance. In this point in time, when consumers aren't spending, we've got a federal government which is saying, no, we're going to effectively, for middle-class Australians, the cost of your health insurance is going up. I hardly think that's going to get out there people spending more, and certainly it's not going to provide a great deal of contribution to state government revenues. It's not all bad news out there. We've forgotten that some items are actually getting cheaper. We tend to forget about these sorts of things. One is cars. Now, this is a bog standard Holden car that's the cheapest, the most affordable in 35 years. Quite an amazing development. Now, I continue to drive a 91 Ford Falcon, so I can do with an upgrade. So I'm using this chart in presentations around the countryside. This is the car affordability of a Porsche Roadster. I think if I use this as much as I can, somebody from Porsche will eventually be in the audience and they'll help me out. Certainly you have the Targa rally here, and I know Porsche 911s tend to be the ones running around the roads, but you know, Porsche's got to help out sooner or later. You go back 10 years ago, it would have taken somebody on the average wage 2.5 years, all their wage going in, to be able to buy one of these cars. Now it's 1.5 years. Now that's still a long time, and you still may think it's unaffordable, but this is the change over time. People's wages have been rising, or at least I'm told they're rising. That's not happening at Commonwealth Bank. At least we've got a job though. Wages are rising, but prices have been flat or falling. You know, it's not just for these items, it's things like washing machines and fridges and toasters and kettles and whatnot, televisions. We tend to forget that these things are more affordable. The problem when wages are going up, we find ways of spending our money. Mobile phones, internet connections, pay TV connections. When other things are going up, say, I can't impossibly, you know, sort of pay for this. Difficult at the moment to be able to pay all my goods. Well, that's because we're buying more things which have become essential in life rather than anything else. Important for us to be able to think about. Now let's talk about interest rates and then we'll finish up. And then I might actually finish on time. In terms of interest rates, yes, we were surprised as everyone else the Reserve Bank decided to leave interest rates unchanged. In November or December last year, we thought that the Reserve Bank should be cutting rates but didn't think they would, and of course they did. This time around, the opposites occurred. They decided to leave rates on hold when we thought that it was pretty clear that interest rates should be going down. The Reserve Bank looks at a number of things. The Reserve Bank looks at the level of interest rates to determine whether they need to be cutting rates or not. And at the moment, the variable rate is slightly above longer-term averages. After some of the moves by the banks this week, it's a little bit higher than that as well. But in this sort of environment, we would just believe that the Reserve Bank should have interest rates close to normal or even below normal. What about borrowing? Well, people aren't borrowing, are they? National Australia Bank had a survey out this week that showed that 2/3 of all businesses don't require finance at the moment from the bank. You go to the institution or you go to the small business and say, would you like some money? They say, no, but I've got some money for you. Would you like some money from me? It's an interesting development that we've got at the moment where firms are cashed up and they don't require a finance. Home prices, well, they've basically been flat or falling. So the Reserve Bank can't be worried about that, can they? Still, the Reserve Bank left interest rates high, and of course we've got the Aussie dollar. Today, around about $1.07. Bad news basically for almost everyone concerned. If you're in tourism, if you're a retailer, if you're a manufacturer, even if you're a miner, the fact that the Aussie dollar is going up is making life more difficult. The only ones that are happy is consumers. Because, you know, you're thinking Wimbledon. You're thinking US Open, aren't you? You're thinking shopping excursions. You're thinking online spending. Now, that doesn't help our economy too much. And the Aussie being at high levels is one of the things the Reserve Bank take into consideration. So why didn't they cut? I think it was probably more a tactical consideration. They wanted to see what the banks would do with interest rates. They wanted to see what would happen in Europe. The Reserve Bank hasn't closed the door on interest rate cuts. They say if things continue to slide, then we certainly will be cutting interest rates. So certainly it's a case of watch this space. It's not all bad news out there. Some smart businesses realise that this global turmoil has thrown up an opportunity. Those people who are wanting finance, they're looking at a 3-year swap yield and they're saying this is close to the best levels that we've ever seen. Why don't we embrace that now? Why don't we fix up our borrowing? Why don't we unleash some more spending power by refinancing our loans? For every situation, Greece, Portugal or Spain, that's why these levels are low. Recently, Australian 10-year bonds were at the lowest level in 50 years. Was it something we did here down under? Well, yeah, we're paying our bills. We haven't got high debt levels. And as a result, the rest of the world is embracing our debt, and that's providing opportunities for a range of businesses. Consumer sentiment at the moment, I didn't update this for yesterday, but basically we're sitting on the zero line, around about 100 to 101. That is probably the worst place to be. If you were at significantly high, okay, people would be going out there and spending. If consumer sentiment was going through the floor, the Reserve Bank would be cutting interest rates. When you're sitting at the zero line, everyone's just saying, oh, that's nice, we'll just sit here a bit longer, the Reserve Bank will sit there a bit longer. Nothing gets done. And unfortunately, we're at the point at the moment. This year, well, we're going to be focused on Europe. We're also going to be focused on the US election. Now, it could be positive or negative. The fact that they're worried about the election means they may not stuff up the economy. They'll be focused more on the politics than playing the usual sorts of games. But it may also mean that the hard decisions don't get done. But watch the US election. Watch the Aussie dollar. Certainly, any area of business, it has implications. Now, today I've spoken about a lot about the economy. What you should be doing is digesting the information and saying, so what? What does this mean to me? What does this mean to my customers, my clients, friends and family? That's where you're getting the real value out of this sort of economics. So think back over some of the things that I've spoken about. I should have said this right at the beginning. I usually do. Think about what I've said so far and see where the opportunities are. Is there some opportunity for your business or personally? Should you be going out there and buying property in this sort of environment? Those are the sorts of things that we need to be thinking about. These are our forecasts for the economy. A typical economic presentation, we have these sorts of forecasts. This year we're looking for normal economic growth, somewhere around about 3.25%. Certainly it hasn't been normal for some time, but that's our expectation. We don't think inflation is going to be a problem, but we are still factoring in the fact that the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates by 0.25%. Unemployment, we could drift up in the short term, but we think it's going to fall back over the second half of the year. We still believe for business this is one of the biggest things you need to focus on. Attracting and retaining staff in future, in coming years, is going to be difficult. And part of the reason is Gen Y. They're a little bit different. A little bit different, in terms of previous generations. And what we say to a lot of businesses, if you've got any good Gen Y staff, any long-serving Gen Y staff, people that have been with you 6 months or more, hold on to them. Hold on to them. Because tomorrow they might want to be a rocket scientist or a pilot or whatever it happens to be. If you want to drive your business forward, you've got to basically attract good staff, hold on to that good staff and get them to drive your business forward. The Aussie dollar, we expect it to remain relatively high for the simple reason the US Federal Reserve doesn't like its currency. It's going to leave interest rates unchanged till 2014. Now this is the last slide. Relief for everyone in the room. Economics, the science of explaining tomorrow why the predictions you made yesterday didn't come true today. Unfortunately in economics it's a bit like that. Sort of like last year when we were thinking about the economy. All of a sudden, Japan had an earthquake, tsunami, followed by a nuclear accident. How many people forecast that? None of you saw it coming. I didn't see it coming. But at the end of the day, we have to work with the consequences. Now, the easy thing is to say, well, it's all too difficult. Everything's going to pot around the place. I'm going to sit on my hands and do nothing. You can do that, but your own personal situation, your own business situation is not going to be advanced. You should be embracing the opportunities rather than focusing on the risk. As Tony Abbott would say, stuff happens. I'm paraphrasing him. In this sort of environment, we've got to focus on the fact that consumers have changed and we need to change with them to be able to embrace the opportunities which are out there. Consumers, a lot of you in the room have got the ability to spend, it's just that you don't want to spend at the moment. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.